First Battle of Bull Run. It's been about a year and a half into the war, and Bull Run is right outside of Washington, D.C. And so this is what happened. The Southern troops, Beauregard was moving his troops up here. Those are the Confederate troops. The Northern troops, McDowell, he was stationed in D.C., Washington, D.C., and he was going to meet the Southern troops there. And so everyone knew that somewhere along here, this area, these two armies were going to meet. And so they were, in terms of their troop strength, they were pretty equal, not that much difference. So the Confederate Army had a little bit more. Even their loss of life, not that much different. Wounded, Confederate Army, a bit more. Captured, Union Army, and we'll explain this number in a moment. And then total losses. And you can see all the little differences really began to add up. So the Union Army was marching out there. And there was a real perspective in Washington, D.C. and in the North at the time that this was not going to be a long war, that this was going to be a war easily won, easily put down the Southern rebellion, and then that they can kind of get this over with and get things worked out and get on with living. And so it was really seen almost as kind of the South was going to be rather insignificant. And so as the troops were marching out of D.C., people especially from Washington, D.C. came out in carriages and had picnic baskets, and it was like entertainment. They were going to park the carriage on the side of the battlefield and watch these two armies fight each other and watch the South lose. And so the troops, the Northern troops, got to Bull Run, and the South started pushing the Northern troops back. In fact, the Northern troops became very scared, and they began to run and retreat. And so the Southern troops began to chase them towards Washington, D.C. And the people who were out there in their carriages on this afternoon, ready to watch this battle, realized, oh, we aren't safe. These Southern troops come and capture us? And panic begins to set in. Panic begins to set in the Northern Army and the spectators. And there turns, as the South begins to advance and push back the Northern troops, they begin to fall apart and run towards Washington, D.C. Well, you have all these civilians in their carriages and whole families out here to watch this. Well, they panic because they don't want to be hurt in any sense. And so you have this crazy panic retreat. And that will explain why there were so many more Union Army soldiers captured, because the Southern Army caught up with them as they retreated. So the First Battle of Bull Run was a horrific defeat for the Northern Army, and people took a step back and went, maybe this won't be as easy as we think. And I had mentioned that one of the other significant things, besides the land battle, was the battle of what we call the ironclads. And what both the North and the South did was they put sheets of iron and welded them, attached them to these ships. So when these cannonballs would come, and these cannonballs could be the size of basketballs, instead of hitting wood, destroying the wood part of the ship, it would bounce off. And these ships, this was the first time you would call almost the beginning of the modern age of battleships. You know, ships that really had a protection on them so they could advance. So this was a real significant step in the evolution of warfare, sea warfare. And so the first metal ships in the world, and this is an artist's drawing of them firing at one another. But these cannonballs, now because of the weight of the iron, the ships sat very, very low in the water, but they didn't sink, as opposed to, you could see a wooden ship there, how much lower they are. And they didn't sink. So this was a very significant point in warfare. Now, that was happening in the west, in the east, by Washington, D.C. and off the coast. But there was another real significant point to the northern strategy of the Anaconda Plan. And one of their goals was, if they could take control of the Mississippi River, the South could not get help or supplies from foreign countries who could ship the supplies up the Mississippi River and continue to send those supplies up to the Southern armies. So, General Grant controlled, the Northern General, he was for the Union, he controlled most of the Mississippi. And say they were in Shiloh, Tennessee, and Grant was coming down, and the South, the Southern Army, attacked them at Shiloh. The Battle of Shiloh was probably one of the most fierce ones at that time during the war. There were 11,000 casualties just in the north. So now the casualty rate, and this is very significant for the South, is very high in these battles. And it was 13,000 in the South. This was a major railroad center for the South. And that's why when they saw Grant coming down, they knew they had to try to protect it. So if they got help from foreign countries, they could send it to a railroad hub and then distribute the supplies. Well, the Union won the Battle of Shiloh. It was a fierce battle. It was, you can't have 24,000 men die in one battle without it being quite fierce. And so after Shiloh, the Union forces moved from Shiloh, and they moved down the Mississippi and just began to control and capture the Mississippi. So by summer, the entire Mississippi was controlled. So now the South has a real problem. And they knew it was slowly, this Anaconda Plan was slowly working for the North. In the South, this was a major factor for them to lose that. One of the things that the South had over the North was their leadership. Robert E. Lee, General E. Lee, was a brilliant tactician. And after McClellan was defeated at Bull Run, Lee believed that Richmond was not threatened, and Richmond is very close to Washington, D.C. So he decided, we pushed back this Union Army, we don't need to worry about them, and it gave them a lot of confidence. And they thought, well, then let's go attack them on their soil, which would really kind of shake up the North. The North really had this attitude that they were going to win. And so, and he was hoping if they had a victory, then they could get help from countries in Europe to support their independence. And in the North, the public, after their soil was attacked, would lose their enthusiasm for the war. So, in September, Lee sneaks his troops into western Maryland. But a problem is for Lee that a Union officer found a piece of paper with his battle plan. So the Union Army found out where Lee was going, and they met his army, the Confederate Army, at a place called Antietam. And we will talk about Antietam in the next video.